Thanks to you at home for joining us this hour. The morning that the U.S. House of Representatives voted yes, that they would impeach President Bill Clinton because of his extramarital affair, it was that same morning in the House that the man who had just been chosen to become Speaker of the House, he resigned. That same morning, the day of the impeachment vote. And he resigned in a surprise announcement on the floor of the House on the day of the Bill Clinton impeachment vote. And we now know that the reason that happened was because of this man, Larry Flynt, the publisher of Hustler magazine. Larry Flynt ran this ad in the Washington Post a few weeks before that House vote on impeaching Bill Clinton. The ad said, "Reward. Larry Flynt and Hustler magazine announce a cash offer of up to $1 million. Have you had an adulterous sexual encounter with a current member of the United States Congress or a high-ranking government official? Can you provide documentary evidence of illicit sexual relations with a congressman, senator, or other prominent office holder? If so, Larry Flynt and Hustler magazine will pay you up to $1 million if we choose to publish your verified story and use your material." They ran that ad in the Washington Post in October of 1999, and by December of 1999, it paid off. It paid off, presumably, for whoever tipped Larry Flynt, and it paid off for Larry Flynt when he got to claim the scalp of the next Speaker of the House, Bob Livingston, by outing Bob Livingston for his affair, and claiming his scalp actually on the day that the House of Representatives was voting to impeach President Clinton for his affair. Whatever you think of Larry Flynt and his life's work, the man, frankly, puts on a good pageant when it comes to teaching everybody the meaning of the word hypocrisy. And so it is one of those strange sort of parts of the denouement, right, of the raging Republican years from the mid-90s, right? After Newt Gingrich and his Republican Revolution and their great political overreach against Bill Clinton, the Republican impeachment of Bill Clinton and the backlash against that, and Republicans losing the midterm elections in 1998 in the middle of the impeachment thing, historically unprecedented losses for Republicans in those midterm elections. And then they pushed Newt Gingrich out and they tried to clean up their mess. But the first guy they picked to replace Newt Gingrich was laid low by the publisher of Hustler magazine. American history. And when Bob Livingston had to go in that scandal, the man they picked instead was Dennis Hastert. They picked Dennis Hastert to become Speaker instead, and Dennis Hastert went on to serve 8 years as Speaker of the House, longer than any other Republican House Speaker before or since. And now today, all these years later, another shoe dropped that, frankly, nobody was waiting for until it dropped. But now we know who and what brought to light the Dennis Hastert scandal. That didn't end his political career, but it has now resulted in a federal criminal indictment of Dennis Hastert years after he left Congress. Last night, when this federal indictment dropped, we found out that Speaker Hastert was being charged with structuring large cash withdrawals from 4 of his bank accounts in a way that seemed designed to avoid the rules, which say you have to federally report large cash withdrawals from your bank accounts. He was also charged with lying to the FBI about that cash, about what those cash withdrawals were for. So the indictment spells out in detail prosecutors' view that what Dennis Hastert was actually using that cash for, $1.7 million so far, and that was less of half of what he had apparently agreed to pay. What he was doing with all that cash was, allegedly, paying it to someone to compensate for and conceal his own misconduct toward this unnamed person sometime in years past. Now, as of last night, we didn't know what that alleged misconduct was, nor did we know to whom Dennis Hastert was allegedly paying this money. Tonight, we still do not know to whom Dennis Hastert was paying that money, allegedly paying that money. But law enforcement sources now say, anonymously and unofficially, they now say that the person in question, the person to whom the money was being paid, was a male student who attended the Illinois high school where Dennis Hastert taught and coached wrestling for years. According to the indictment, Dennis Hastert taught and coached at this one high school in Illinois from 1965 to 1981. We don't know when this student was allegedly there, what years, but anonymous law enforcement sources say that the alleged misconduct that led Dennis Hastert to agree to pay out $3.5 million in cash was sexual misconduct with this student who he was now paying. So there's a few things to figure out here. One is how and why this came to light now, after decades have gone by since the alleged misconduct, including many years in which Dennis Hastert was one of the most visible and powerful and high-ranking politicians in the country at a very, very partisan time. And honestly, even at a not very partisan time, when you've got the kind of job that he had, it means that people are constantly trying to dig dirt on you. Constantly. Both the press and your political opponents, people are always going through everything they can find about you to find any shadow of scandal. Nobody ever turned it up. Until now. From the indictment, we have some breadcrumbs to follow in terms of how it came to be, and it was the cash. The feds say in their indictment that they started in 2013 looking into these large, suspicious cash withdrawals that Dennis Hastert had been making from his bank account since 2010. They said they started looking at those withdrawals to see if he was using the cash for a criminal purpose. In addition, because Dennis Hastert wasn't just some average rich schmo, he was a former very high-ranking politician, they also say they were looking to see if he was the victim of a criminal extortion related to, among other matters, his prior positions in government. Turns out, according to law enforcement sources today, he was not being criminally extorted because of something he did while he was in public office. He was allegedly being extorted because of something he allegedly did before he was ever in office. Isn't that still extortion, though? Wasn't he still being shook down or blackmailed? Isn't that itself a crime? Federal prosecutors believe and have explained in their indictment that Dennis Hastert was being shook down, basically, for this $3.5 million. And he was paying it sloppily, which is how he got caught. But isn't extortion itself a crime? Why is there no indictment for whoever was extorting him, shaking him down, blackmailing him? And then there's this other matter of what he was allegedly being extorted for. And again, this is not in the indictment. This is according to anonymous law enforcement sources speaking with multiple press outlets today. But if federal prosecutors turned up evidence that Dennis Hastert engaged in some kind of sexual misconduct with a student while he was a teacher and a coach, isn't there an underlying crime there that we should expect to also be charged? The Washington Post says tonight, no, that Dennis Hastert is not expected to face any charges related to the alleged misconduct because authorities don't believe they have enough corroborating evidence to bring a case against him, end quote. So there's this one accuser who he allegedly was paying off, but that's not enough to corroborate that the sexual abuse or sexual misconduct actually happened. Okay. But then there's this tonight from the LA Times. Look. A top official who would not be identified speaking about the federal charges said investigators also spoke with a second person who raised similar allegations that corroborated what the first student said. The second person, however, was not being paid by Dennis Hastert. BuzzFeed similarly reports tonight that federal prosecutors considered but did not pursue additional charges against the former speaker, which would have included reference to not just an individual A, but an individual B, one of potentially several alleged victims. Now, NBC News has not verified this aspect of the reporting, this second person who can corroborate the sexual abuse allegations. NBC has not corroborated this aspect of the reporting and is not testifying to it. That's why I'm being specific in attributing it to the LA Times and to BuzzFeed. But where we're at now is that Speaker Hastert has paid bail. He's out on his own recognizance. He's due to be in court for his arraignment as soon as next week to face these charges. But if these reports from law enforcement sources today turn out to be accurate, I mean, two big questions, right? If Dennis Hastert was being extorted, if he was being shook down by someone who he allegedly sexually abused when that person was a teenager and he was a coach and a teacher, how is the decision made, and is the decision now made as to whether or not to charge his alleged sexual abuse victim for shaking him down, for extorting him, for blackmailing him? Extortion is a crime. And, as another matter, how is the decision made, and is the decision now made, as to whether or not to charge Dennis Hastert for the underlying crime of this alleged sexual misconduct with a kid or with kids while he was a teacher and a coach back in Illinois before he ever entered politics, especially if prosecutors did talk to more than one kid who says that he or she went through that with him, even if only one of the kids decided to blackmail him for it decades down the road. Legally, how do we get here, and what's going to happen next? Joining us now is Jeffrey Cramer. He's a former federal prosecutor. He's now the senior managing director of Kroll Investigations in Chicago. Mr. Cramer, thanks very much for your time tonight. I appreciate you being here.
Good evening, Rachel.
Let me ask first about the what appears to be extortion. Haven't prosecutors alleged here in the indictment that the former speaker, Dennis Hastert, was essentially the victim of extortion, that he was being shook down for this money or by somebody who was threatening to go public with it? Isn't extortion a crime?
Extortion is certainly a crime. But just because the individual A was not charged today, a couple things. One, it doesn't mean a charge might not be coming down the line. Or it could be that a charge exists right now, but is sealed, and we don't know about it. But I don't think just because there are no charges pending, at least publicly now, we don't know what's going to happen down the line.
I guess I asked, too, keeping in mind other different types of criminal charges against public officials, where it's more typically what we're looking at is something like bribery or an alleged quid pro quo. And one of the questions for those of us who aren't lawyers, who aren't involved in the justice system, is how can there be a bribe without a bribe-er? Shouldn't people always be charged on both sides of the crime if prosecutors can prove that the crime occurred?
Understand that, but I would just make a distinguish between the bribe situation that you just gave, and certainly in Chicago and Illinois, we have our fair share of elected officials who have gone down that line. And this office, the U.S. Attorney's Office in Chicago, is frankly one of the best offices in the country in pursuing these kind of cases, although this seems to have taken a pivot. But here you don't have a bribe E and a bribe-er. You have individual A, if it plays out, was a victim of sexual abuse at one point, who was then turned into presumably an extortionist. And you have Dennis Hastert, who did the flip. At one point, he abused his position, if this plays out, and is now the victim of an extortion. So it's not a simple two people involved in a conspiracy. You have the person who was looking for money, millions of dollars, at one point, if it's true, was the victim of sexual abuse.
On the abuse allegations, and again, I want to be clear that the sexual misconduct, sexual abuse allegations, I'm sourcing them to anonymous leaks from law enforcement officials who are not putting their name on the record. It is not part of the indictment. But if those leaks today are accurate, that the underlying past misdeed here is some sort of sexual conduct, some kind of sexual abuse between Dennis Hastert and a student or students when he was a teacher, when he was a coach, what does go into the determination about whether or not that conduct should be charged as a crime?
It's a calculus, and you're right, we don't know exactly what the misconduct was. However, if you look at the indictment, the wording of it, where it lists he's a teacher and a coach at the high school at a certain period of time, federal prosecutors don't put in language into indictments of that nature unless they're relevant. So that had to be relevant to the misconduct. And therefore you have, one could argue, misconduct, from what we know now, that was worth millions of dollars to Mr. Hastert to keep quiet. So there is a logic to what people are saying right now. And if it was sexual abuse at that time, you can see why he want to keep it secret. But it's a calculus that prosecutors will look at into how to bring these charges, and equally important, what language to put in the indictment. I think, and they appropriately did not include that language in there because it's not relevant to the charge, which is structuring. It's in and of itself a pretty boring charge, structuring transactions so the banks don't alert the federal authorities that something over $10,000 is going in or out. It's that misconduct part right now that obviously has people's interest.
Is there a statute of limitations issue if these things did happen sometime between 1965 and 1981, which was when he was at that school?
Certainly, and I'm not sure what the statute of limitations was for sexual misconduct or sexual abuse or whatever it might have been called at that time. But now we're talking 25 years later. So not only is it the corroboration factor that you discussed earlier, but there's a statute of limitations problem, I would think.
Jeffrey Cramer, former federal prosecutor, now senior managing director of Kroll Investigations. Thanks for helping us understand this. Very clarifying to talk to you about this. Thanks.
Certainly.
All right. Coming up. A thing I learned in today's news that surprised me so much that I physically fell over, and that's not hyperbole, and I can show you how it happened. Plus, we've got coming up tonight a plan to defeat ISIS, courtesy of President Trump. Stay with us.